Good evening. This is Tuesday, January 13th, 7 days until the inauguration of President-elect Barack Obama. The ranking Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee today calling Senator Hillary Clinton, quote, the epitome of a big leaguer, making reference to working with her when she is Secretary of State, adding that her qualifications for the post are remarkable. Our fifth story of the countdown, since her fitness for the job is not and never was the question. Congressional Republicans today instead dredging up their most memorable accomplishment of the 1990s, pointlessly beating up on her husband. Call it the impeachment of President Clinton Part 2, the charitable works edition. At her confirmation hearing on Capitol Hill, Senator Clinton, overshadowed by the former president, Senator Richard Lugar, taking the lead in raising questions about potential conflicts of interest due to Mr. Clinton's global fundraising for his charitable foundations. Mr. Lugar of the opinion that Mr. Clinton's charities should stop taking all foreign donations while she is Secretary of State.
The bottom line is that even well-intentioned foreign donations carry risks for United States foreign policy. This was bound to be a dilemma from the moment that the President-elect asked you to become Secretary of State.
But a deal for addressing the dilemma long since reached under the plan worked out in late November by Clinton officials and the Obama transition team. The Clinton Foundation will be allowed to accept new contributions from foreign governments if they are cleared with ethics officials at the State Department and possibly the White House counsel. Republicans believing that will not be enough, that all foreign individual donations must be disclosed, as well as large domestic donations. Senator Clinton saying the guidelines in place are sufficient and were reached in good faith.
All contributors will be disclosed, and all contributors to the Clinton Global Initiative are disclosed in public. I think that the way that this has been hammered out is probably as close as we can get to doing something that is so unprecedented that there is no formula for it, and we've tried to do the very best we could.
More remarkable, perhaps, the substance of Mrs. Clinton's answers on foreign policy, long over her days of clashing with Obama, as she did during the debates over his willingness to engage with Iran. This will be Barack Obama's State Department, and if it's engagement he wants, engagement he shall get.
We are not taking any option off the table at all, but we will pursue a new, perhaps different approach that will become a cornerstone of what the Obama administration believes is an attitude toward engagement that might bear fruit.
Senator Clinton also telling the other senators that getting out of Iraq would be a top priority.
Our larger interests will be best served by safely and responsibly withdrawing our troops from Iraq, supporting a transition to full Iraqi responsibility for their sovereign nation, rebuilding our overtaxed military, and reaching out to other nations to help stabilize the region and employ a broader arsenal of tools to fight terrorism.
Time now to check in with our own Jonathan Alter, also, of course, senior editor at Newsweek magazine. John, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
Senator Lugar also said today that the issue with the Clinton Foundation and the Global Initiative, he called that a unique problem, and he said it should not be a barrier to Senator Clinton getting the job as Secretary of State. So what was the point of all that?
Well, I think he wanted to lay down a marker and insist that the Clintons engage in full disclosure, and Mrs. Clinton suggested that she would do so, but they wanted that on the record. He did blindside them some because, as you indicated, this deal had already been cut, and I also think that there wasn't enough attention given to the costs of getting rid of the Clinton Global Initiative. This organization pumps hundreds of millions of dollars into AIDS relief, poverty relief, all kinds of really good causes around the world. And I don't think we'd want to, sacrifice it over some attenuated idea of conflict of interest.
On this night last year, we were discussing the results of the primary in New Hampshire. Is it remarkable now to hear Mrs. Clinton being an agent, being the top diplomat, and perhaps to this point, the top salesperson of Obama's foreign policy ideals?
Yeah, it's quite a turn of events. But, she's clearly on the team. And I thought it was fascinating that they unveiled this notion today of smart power. Her appearance reinforced that new slogan for American foreign policy because it was a very smart appearance. She's got a very sophisticated understanding of the world's challenges, and the policy that they're intending to implement is one that uses all the tools in the toolbox, not just military, not just conventional diplomatic tools, but the whole array of options that the United States has for advancing its interests in the world. So we're going to have a more sophisticated foreign policy, and they now have a name for it, which I think we'll be talking about for years to come.
Speaking of tools, President Bush's insistence yesterday that the U.S. is still viewed very highly in the world. Despite that, as Secretary of State, one would assume Mrs. Clinton will have a long to-do list. Did she give an indication as to what sort of stamina would be required? How long her initial week will actually last? Is it 4 years' worth in 1 week?
Well, you know, you got to hand it to the Clintons on the stamina point. She will be shuttling all over the world. Presumably, she's going to have to go to the Middle East rather soon. Her plate is very full. Gaza, Iran, North Korea, Pakistan is arguably the most dangerous country in the world, and obviously Iraq and Afghanistan. So she's going to have her hands full. As she said today, it's all hands on deck. The question is whether one of those hands might be her husband, who could lend his expertise in solving some of these global problems.
While we're talking about the cabinet, the Treasury nominee, Mr. Geithner, is in trouble tonight. He hired a housekeeper whose immigration status seems to have expired, and he initially failed to pay self-employed payroll taxes for himself, obviously, and then did so after the proverbial conversation with the IRS. Is this another Zoe Baird situation where somebody is just going to go out the window, or do they seem to have been honest mistakes? And maybe more importantly, is there sort of a bipartisan feeling that this guy is too valuable to even let ordinary rules apply to him?
Well, first of all, it does seem to be an honest mistake. It would really be a shame if something like this sunk the nomination for anything less than, misleading behavior on Geithner's part, which hasn't shown up yet. We are in very serious times, Keith. They're quite different than 1993 when Zoe Baird's nomination was sunk for Attorney General over this kind of nanny problem. Geithner is, by all accounts, the only person in Washington who fully understands TARP. $700 billion. We cannot afford at this point, unless there's gross malfeasance, to take him out of the picture.
Jonathan Alter of MSNBC and Newsweek. As always, John, great thanks.
Thanks, Keith.